The dim glow of neon signs flickered through the haze of cigarette smoke, casting erratic shadows across the worn wooden tables of the rusty anchor. It was a Friday night in the forgotten outskirts of a dusty border town, where the air hung heavy with the scent of stale beer, engine grease, and unspoken regrets. Laughter erupted in bursts from the corner booth, where a group of weathered men in leather vests slapped cards down with calloused hands, their voices rough like gravel under tires. The jukebox hummed a low country ballad, its melody weaving through the clink of glasses and the occasional roar of a motorcycle engine idling outside. 11-year-old Tommy gripped the crumpled envelope tighter against his chest, his small frame swallowed by the oversized denim jacket that had once belonged to his father. His sneakers scuffed against the sticky floorboards as he pushed through the swinging doors, the cool night air chasing him inside like a reluctant shadow. Eyes turned toward him, curious, suspicious, some narrowing in the dim light. This wasn't a place for kids. The bar was a sanctuary for outcasts. A neutral ground where truckers, drifters, and the Iron Promise Motorcycle Club gathered to drown out the world's cruelties. But Tommy didn't flinch. He had walked 3 miles from his rundown trailer on the edge of town, the weight of desperation propelling him forward. He wove through the crowd, dodging a spilled pool of whiskey and ignoring the mutterings that followed. "Kids lost." Someone chuckled from the bar. "Better find your mama before you get stepped on." Tommy's heart pounded, but his jaw set firm. He scanned the room until his gaze locked on the man at the far end. A broad-shouldered figure in a faded black vest, adorned with patches that told stories of roads long traveled. Hawk Daniels, leader of the Iron Promise, sat nursing a whiskey neat, his silver-streaked beard framing a face etched with lines from battles unseen. Hawk's eyes, sharp as a hawk's talon, lifted slowly from his glass, meeting the boy's stare without a flicker of surprise. Tommy stopped inches from the table, his breath coming in shallow bursts. The envelope trembled slightly in his hands as he pulled out a faded photograph, its edges worn from too many desperate clutches. The image showed a teenage girl with bright eyes and a shy smile, standing beside a younger Tommy in front of a rusted swing set. "Sir," he said, his voice steady despite the quiver in his lip, "this is my sister who vanished 3 years ago." The words hung in the air like smoke, drawing the room's attention. Conversations tapered off. A glass paused midway to a mouth. 3 years. The police had filed a report, shrugged at the lack of leads and moved on. The town had whispered about runaways and worse, then forgotten entirely, but not Tommy. Every night he stared at that photo, whispering her name, Lila, like a prayer. Hawk took the picture with deliberate care, his thick fingers brushing the edges as if handling something fragile, sacred. The bar fell into a hush, the jukebox's tune fading into irrelevance. He studied the face, the background of cracked pavement and distant mountains, and something shifted in his expression, a shadow crossing his features like a memory stirring from the depths. Tommy held his breath, the envelope now limp in his grasp. Around them, the Iron Promise crew leaned in subtly, Jax with his scarred knuckles, Riley nursing a bandaged arm from a recent skirmish, and Old Timer, whose eyes had seen too many sunrises. They were brothers not by blood, but by oaths sworn under starlit skies and the rumble of Harleys. Seconds stretched into eternity. Hawk's gaze lifted to Tommy's, locking with an intensity that made the boy feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. The leader's voice, when it came, was low and gravelly, cutting through the silence like a knife through fog. "We'll bring her home." Just 3 words, delivered without fanfare, without raised volume, but they landed like thunder in the quiet bar, freezing every soul in place. Glasses halted. Breaths caught. It wasn't a boast or a threat, it was a vow, echoing promises Hawk had made long ago in the smoke of war zones and the dust of forgotten trails. Promises to protect the innocent, to stand against the indifference that swallowed lives whole. Tommy's eyes widened, a spark of hope igniting in their depths. He nodded once, fiercely, as if those words had already bridged the chasm of loss. Hawk slid the photo into his vest pocket, the gesture sealing the pact. The bar exhaled slowly, murmurs resuming like a river finding its course. But the air had changed, charged. The Iron Promise wasn't just a club. It was a brotherhood forged in fire, bound by codes that outlasted laws and time. Hawk rose then, clapping a hand on Tommy's shoulder, gentle yet unyielding. "Go home, kid. Tell no one yet. We'll handle this." As Tommy turned to leave, the doors swinging behind him into the night, Hawk signaled to his crew with a subtle nod. Jax cracked his knuckles. Riley downed his drink. Outside, the first engine growled to life, a harbinger of the storm to come. Hawk lingered at the table, staring into his glass, the weight of old scars pressing down. 3 years ago, he'd ridden away from a similar plea, burying the guilt under miles of asphalt, but promises had a way of circling back, demanding payment. This one, sparked by a boy's courage, would drag him into shadows he'd long avoided. Corrupt officials turning blind eyes, whispers of hidden networks preying on the vulnerable, and a past that intertwined with Lila's disappearance in ways he couldn't yet fathom. The neon flickered on, illuminating the road ahead. Dawn was hours away, but the ride had already begun. For Tommy, it was the flicker of light in endless dark. For Hawk, it was redemption's call, pulling him back to the honor he'd nearly lost. And for the Iron Promise, it was family. Chosen, unbreakable, rising to meet the fight. The desert wind whispered through the cracks as Hawk stepped outside, the photo burning against his chest like a brand. He mounted his bike, the leather creaking under him, and revved the engine. The convoy would form at first light, but the promise was already in motion. Lealdad, honra. They weren't just words. They were the roar that drowned out silence. Word count, 872. The first rays of dawn painted the horizon in streaks of crimson and gold, turning the dusty road into a ribbon of fire that snaked through the barren landscape. Hawk's Harley thrummed beneath him, a steady pulse that matched the rhythm of his thoughts. The photo in his pocket felt heavier than the saddlebags packed with tools and memories. He'd sent Tommy home with a warning to stay quiet, but sleep was a luxury neither could afford. As the sun crested the hills, the convoy assembled at the edge of town, a line of gleaming chrome and black leather, 20 strong from the Iron Promise, their engines a low growl that stirred the morning mist. Jax rode shotgun at Hawk's flank, his scarred face set in grim determination. The wind whipping through his cropped hair. "You sure about this, boss? Kid's story checks out. Lila vanished after that storm 3 years back. Cops said runaway, but the file's thinner than desert air." Hawk nodded once, eyes fixed on the endless stretch ahead. He'd pulled strings last night, calling in favors from old contacts who'd owed him since the war. Whispers confirmed it. No body, no traces, just a cold case gathering dust in some precinct drawer. But Hawk knew better. In places like this, disappearances weren't accidents. They were threads in a web spun by those who profited from silence. They rolled into the heart of the border sprawl, past faded billboards, advertising motels that hadn't seen a guest in years, and shacks huddled against the wind like forgotten secrets. The air carried the sharp tang of sagebrush and distant rain, a scent that tugged at Hawk's buried past. 3 years ago he'd been here, riding through after a run-in with smugglers, promising a desperate family he'd keep an eye out for their girl. He'd failed then, distracted by his own demons, the bottle, the endless road. Lila's face in the photo had stirred it all up, a mirror to losses he'd patched over with leather and loyalty. This time, the promise wasn't just words, it was a reckoning. The first stop was the old trailer park on the outskirts, where Tommy lived in a sagging double-wide flanked by rusted cars and overgrown weeds. Hawk killed the engine, the silence amplifying the creak of cooling metal. Tommy burst out the door before they could knock, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and fire. "You came back," he breathed, clutching the doorframe. Inside, the place smelled of instant noodles and faint mildew, a single bulb casting long shadows over mismatched furniture. A faded quilt draped the couch, and on the wall hung more photos. Lila laughing at a county fair, her arm around a younger Tommy, their mother smiling faintly in the background before illness had claimed her. "Sit," Hawk said, guiding the boy to the table. Jax hung back by the door, scanning the room like a sentinel. Tommy spilled what he knew in halting bursts. Lila had been 16, working odd jobs at the diner to keep them afloat after their dad skipped town. One night, after a shift, she'd walked home through the arroyo, a shortcut shadowed by mesquite trees and flickering street lamps. A storm had hit hard, thunder rattling the trailers like Judgment Day. By morning, she was gone. No screams, no signs, just her backpack found days later, empty by the dry riverbed. Hawk listened, his hands folded like weathered stone. Anyone she talked to? Friends? Anyone watching too close? Tommy shook his head, then paused. There was this guy at the diner, Mr. Harlan, the owner, always asking questions, giving her extra shifts, said he'd help with money for school. After she vanished, he shut down the place quick. Folks said he moved north, but no one knows where. The name landed like a spark on dry tinder. Harlan. Hawk's mind raced back. Rumors from the club grapevine about a network skirting the law, funneling kids across lines for labor or worse, shielded by crooked badges. As Tommy spoke, the convoy's radios crackled softly outside. Riley's voice cut through. "Boss, got a lead. Old-timer remembers Harlan, ran with a crew that crossed paths with us years back. Tied to the warehouse district, before the fires." Hawk's jaw tightened. The warehouse fires, another cold scar, ruled accidental, but smelling of cover-up. Arson to hide dealings, lives lost in the blaze, if Lila had crossed that path. He stood, clapping Tommy's shoulder again. "We're digging. Stay inside, lock the doors. If anyone asks, you saw nothing." They mounted up, the engines roaring back to life, kicking up gravel that danced in the sunlight. The ride to the warehouse ruins took them through sun-baked lots and chain-link fences bowed by time. The structures loomed like skeletons against the sky, charred beams twisting upward, the ground littered with shattered glass that crunched under tires. Hawk dismounted, the heat rising from the asphalt in waves, carrying the faint, acrid echo of smoke long faded. His boots stirred ash as he paced the perimeter, eyes tracing the faded graffiti and boarded windows. Jax knelt by a rusted door, prying it open with a crowbar. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust motes swirling in shafts of light piercing the cracks. They fanned out, flashlights cutting through the gloom, revealing stacks of forgotten crates, yellowed papers scattered like ghosts. Riley found it first, a ledger, half-burned, tucked under a collapsed shelf. Names, dates, payments, coded, but clear enough to Hawk's trained eye. Lila's wasn't listed, but an entry for LG matched the timeline, routed to a holding spot near the border fence. "Harlan's handiwork," Hawk muttered, the words tasting like bile. It wasn't just negligence. It was a machine grinding down the vulnerable, greased by officials who looked the other way for a cut. As they pieced it together, a distant siren wailed. Sheriff's patrol, routine maybe, but too close. Hawk signaled retreat, the crew slipping out like shadows. The ledger secure in his vest beside the photo. Back on the bikes, the wind howled fiercer, whipping sand against their faces. Hawk's mind churned. Harlan was the key, but unlocking him meant stirring the hive. Calls to brass in the department, favors called in from veteran brothers now in suits. The iron promise wasn't about guns or glory. It was about truth, cutting through lies. loyalty mending what the world broke. For Lila, wherever she was, alive, fighting, or lost to the dark, this ride was her beacon. By midday, they hit a roadside diner for intel, the chrome stools cold under sun-warmed denim. A waitress with tired eyes recognized the name, her voice dropping low over coffee steam. "Harlan, heard he's holed up in a ranch house off Route 17. Got protection, deputy kin or something." Hawk nodded thanks, sliding a tip across the counter. The pieces were aligning, but so was the danger. A tail on the horizon, black SUV unmarked, hinting at eyes watching the watchers. As the sun climbed higher, casting mirages on the heat-shimmering road, Hawk felt the old fire reignite. Redemption wasn't a destination. It was the miles between promise and fulfillment. Tommy's face, Lila's smile, they fueled him now, binding the club tighter than any chain. The convoy pressed on, engines singing a dirge for secrets about to unravel. And now I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The sun hung merciless, like a judge's gavel over the cracked asphalt of Route 17, its glare turning the horizon into a wavering veil of heat. Hawk's convoy cut through the shimmer, a serpent of chrome and thunder, engines growling in unison against the relentless wind that carried whispers of sage and scorched earth. The black SUV had appeared 20 miles back, a shadow on the rear view, maintaining just enough distance to feign coincidence. Hawk signaled Jax with a gloved hand, split the pack, circle wide. Half the riders peeled off onto a dusty side road, kicking up plumes that blurred the sky, while the core group pressed on, the air thickening with unspoken strategy. Hawk's mind replayed the ledger's cryptic lines, the faint ink smudges like ghosts, refusing to fade. LG. Lila's initials, tied to a route that snaked toward hidden outposts where the lost were bartered like cargo. Harlan's name wove through it all, a thread pulling at old wounds. Years ago, in the haze of desert skirmishes, Hawk had crossed paths with men like him, faceless operators who thrived on borders blurred by greed. One promise broken then had cost him a brother in arms, left him riding solo until the iron promise pulled him from the abyss. Now, with Tommy's plea echoing like a drumbeat, Hawk felt the cycle turning. Redemption wasn't forgiveness. It was action, raw and unyielding. The ranch house emerged from the haze like a fortress carved from sun-bleached stone, ringed by barbed wire that glinted wickedly in the light. Outbuildings sagged under corrugated roofs, their shadows pooling dark against the parched ground. No welcoming smoke from a chimney, just the faint hum of a generator and the distant bark of dogs straining at chains. Hawk eased off the throttle, the convoy halting in a loose semicircle, dust settling like a veil over their boots. Jax dismounted first, his boots crunching gravel as he scanned the perimeter, hand resting easy on the handle of a worn multi-tool. Tools for fixing bikes or breaking locks, depending on the need. "Stay sharp," Hawk murmured, his voice low over the cooling tick of engines. The air smelled of dry hay and something sharper, like fear laced with oil. They approached on foot, shadows lengthening as the sun dipped toward afternoon's edge. A weathered sign creaked in the breeze, "No trespassing," but Hawk ignored it, his eyes tracing the tire tracks in the dirt, fresh, SUV-sized, matching their tail. The front door hung ajar, splintered at the hinges, suggesting hasty departure or rough welcome. Inside, the house was a tomb of neglect, overturned chairs, shattered glass crunching underfoot, the faint metallic tang of abandoned meals hanging in the stale air. Riley led the sweep through the dim rooms, flashlight beam dancing over faded calendars pinned to walls, dates frozen 3 years back, the month Lila vanished marked with a hasty circle. In the back office, drawers yawned open like empty promises, papers scattered in chaotic drifts. Jax rifled through a desk, pulling out a crumpled map folded to the borderlands, red ink tracing routes that mirrored the ledger's code. "Jackpot," he grunted, holding up a faded ID card. Harlan's face, older, harder, staring out from under a trucker's cap. But no sign of the man himself, just echoes. A half-empty bottle of cheap bourbon on the table, fingerprints in the dust leading to a back window pried loose. Hawk paused by a corkboard, its pins holding yellowed clippings, news snippets about missing teens, edges curled from time. One photo caught his eye, a grainy shot of Lila at the diner, her smile forced, Harlan's arm slung casual over her shoulder in the background. The caption blurred, but the implication burned. Local Girl AIDS Community. Lies layered thick as the dust. Hawk's fist clenched, the leather of his glove creaking. This wasn't random, it was a pattern, Harlan's web snaring the desperate, shielded by whispers to those in badges. The sheriff's office had buried reports like this, calling them runaways to keep the peace, or the profits, intact. Outside, the dogs' barking intensified, a low rumble building from the hills. Hawk stepped onto the porch, the wood groaning under his weight, and froze. The SUV crested the rise, flanked by two pickups, dust devils swirling in their wake. Not lawmen, these were Harlan's muscle, faces obscured by bandanas, rifles glinting in the sunlight. "Company!" Jax called, already moving to cover. The Iron Promise fanned out, not drawing weapons, but forming a wall of leather and resolve. Engines kicked back to life as a deterrent roar. The lead truck skidded to a halt, doors slamming like punctuation. A burly figure emerged, shotgun loose in his grip, eyes squinting against the glare. "This here's private land. Turn around or we'll make you." His voice carried the drawl of local muscle for hire. Backed by the shuffle of his crew, Hawk stepped forward, unflinching, the photo and map heavy in his pocket. "We're looking for Harlan. Tell him the past caught up. Iron Promise doesn't forget debts." The words hung, a challenge wrapped in calm, evoking oaths sworn in foxholes and under full moons. The man sneered, but hesitation flickered, recognition of the club's name, and tales of rides that toppled empires without a shot fired. "Harlan's gone, ain't coming back, best ride on." But as he spoke, Riley slipped around the side, spotting a glint in the barn, a locked shed, fresh padlock shining. A muffled sound escaped, faint like a cough or a plea, stilling the standoff. Hawk's gaze sharpened. "Open it!" The demand was steel, no room for bluff. Tension coiled like a spring, the wind whipping dust into eyes, the sun beating down as sweat traced paths under collars. The thug shifted, glancing back, but the Iron Promise held ground, a brotherhood silence louder than threats. Finally, he spat into the dirt. "Your funeral." They retreated slow, engines coughing to life, but not before Jax noted the plates. Fake, traceable to a chop shop in the next county. As the vehicles vanished into the haze, Hawk signaled the breach. The padlock snapped under bolt cutters, the shed door creaking open to reveal crates stacked high, shadows hiding more than supplies. Inside, the air was cooler, laced with the musty scent of confinement. No Lila but evidence. Scraps of fabric matching the photo's shirt, a child's drawing crumpled in the corner, Tommy's hand perhaps left as a marker, and a logbook, recent, listing transports, names redacted, but destinations pointing north, toward a network's heart. Hawk exhaled slow, the weight settling deeper. Harlan was running, but the trail burned hotter now. Calls went out to old war buddies in quiet offices, nurses who'd seen patterns in ER logs, firefighters who'd sifted ashes for truths. The club would ride through the night if needed, loyalty the fuel that outlasted fatigue. For Tommy, waiting in his trailer with hope's fragile flame, this was progress. For Hawk, it was the promise uncoiling, pulling him toward confrontation, not with fists, but with the unyielding force of honor restored. The convoy reformed, tires biting earth as they headed back toward town, the setting sun casting long shadows like fingers reaching for secrets. But in the distance, another engine purred. Patrol this time, lights flashing silent warning. The web tightened, but so did their bond. Dawn would bring more miles, more truths unearthed, the roar of justice echoing across the wastes. The patrol car's lights sliced through the twilight like accusatory beacons, painting the convoy in staccato bursts of red and blue that danced across leather vests and chrome fenders. Hawk throttled down, easing the Harley to a gravel-crunching halt at the roadside pullout, the engine's rumble fading to a low purr. The rest of the Iron Promise followed suit, forming a ragged line that blocked the narrow lane, dust motes swirling in the dying light like unsettled spirits. Jax killed his bike beside Hawk, his scarred hand drifting to the vest pocket where the map and logbook lay hidden, while Riley scanned the horizon, the wind tugging at his bandana like an impatient whisper. The sheriff's cruiser rolled up slow, gravel popping under its tires, the spotlight swiveling to pin them in harsh white glare. Deputy Harlan, no relation to the ghost they chased, but close enough in name to twist the knife, stepped out, his boots hitting the ground with deliberate thud. He was a broad man in his 40s, uniform starched but eyes weary from too many nights chasing shadows that paid his way. The badge glinted under the emerging stars, a symbol of order in a land where lines blurred like heat haze. "Evening, Daniels," he drawled, hand resting casual on his belt near the holster but not drawing. "Got reports of a ruckus out at the old ranch. You boys wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Hawk dismounted fluidly, his boots stirring the parched earth, the scent of cooling metal and creosote rising sharp in the air. He met the deputy's gaze level, unflinching, the photo of Lila a silent weight against his chest. "Just passing through, Harlan. Roads are public." The name hung between them, a loaded echo, but Hawk kept his tone even, like the steady hum of a well-tuned engine. No threats, no bluster, just the quiet certainty of a man who'd stared down worse than a badge with a grudge. The crew stayed mounted, engines idling soft, a chorus of restrained power that vibrated through the ground. The deputy shifted, his shadow stretching long across the fading sun's glow, illuminating the faint lines of doubt etching his face. Hawk could read it, the flicker of conflict, the knowledge that Harlan's kin, the real Harlan, had greased palms like his for years. Whispers in precinct break rooms, envelopes thick with untraceable cash to file reports as runaways or accidents. But tonight, with the Iron Promise's eyes on him, that corruption felt exposed, raw under the vast sky. "This ain't your fight, Hawk. Kid's sister? Cops handled it. Girl probably bolted for the city lights. Let it lie." His voice carried a plea beneath the authority, the moral fray of a man who'd bent too far. Hawk stepped closer, the space between them charged like the air before a storm, the distant howl of coyotes underscoring the tension. "Handled it by burying the file while families break?" He pulled the crumpled photo from his pocket, holding it out, not thrusting, but offering like a testament. Lila's smile caught the last light, innocent against the deputy's jaded stare. 3 years. No answers. That's not handling. That's hiding. The words landed soft but unyielding, stirring the crew, Jax's jaw tightening, Riley's fingers flexing on the handlebars. This was the heart of it. Not vengeance, but the quiet insistence of truth against the machine that ground down the weak. Deputy Harlan glanced at the photo, his expression cracking for a heartbeat. Recognition, perhaps, or the ghost of his own buried conscience. He'd seen the patterns, girls like Lila, lured by promises of work or escape, vanishing into networks that spanned the border like veins of poison. His brother, the Harlan they sought, had been the architect, pulling strings from diners to depots, shielded by kin in uniform. But oaths to family warred with the deeper code Hawke invoked, the one forged in foxholes and roadhouse vows, where loyalty meant standing for the voiceless, not silencing them. You stir this up, it gets messy. Brass don't like loose ends, and neither do I. He paused, the cruiser door creaking open behind him, a retreat disguised as resolve. Hawke nodded once, sliding the photo back into place. Messy is what we ride through. Tell your brother the promise remembers. Every debt. It wasn't a warning, it was a mirror, reflecting the deputy's choices back at him. The deputy lingered, the wind rustling sagebrush like pages turning in an unseen ledger, then climbed into his cruiser without another word. Lights flashed once more, a silent concession, before the engine growled to life and peeled away, taillights fading into the encroaching night. The convoy exhaled, engines reigniting in a symphony of relief and resolve. Hawke mounted up, the leather seat warm from the day's heat, and led them onward, the road unspooling like a promise kept. Back in town, under the sodium glow of street lamps, they converged on a nondescript garage, the Iron Promise's unofficial hub, tools scattered amid half-rebuilt bikes, the air thick with oil and camaraderie. Old Timer waited inside, his wrinkled hands poring over the logbook by lantern light, the flame-flickering shadows across walls lined with faded patches and yellowed maps. "Routes, match!" Timer rasped, tracing lines with a gnarled finger. "North to the old mill district, abandoned since the floods. Harlan's using it as a way station. Shipments come in, go out under cover of night. But there's more. A name in the margins. Vargas. Runs the fence line, calls in favors from the other side." Hawke leaned in, the scent of aged paper mingling with the garage's metallic tang, his mind piecing the puzzle. Vargas, a shadow from his war days, a smuggler who traded lives for borders crossed. If Lila had been funneled through, redemption meant dismantling the whole chain, not just one link. Jax paced, his boots echoing on concrete. "We hit the mill at dawn, quiet, in and out." Hawke shook his head, the weight of command settling like dust. "No guns. We expose it. Cameras, witnesses, call in the nurse from the clinic. She's seen the aftermath, the signs of hard travel on kids pulled from wrecks." It was justice's slow burn, building a case that badges couldn't bury, honoring the promise with integrity over impulse. As midnight deepened, the crew dispersed to rest, but Hawke lingered, staring at the photo under the lantern's glow. Tommy's face haunted him too, the boy's unyielding hope, a mirror to his own scarred youth. By pre-dawn, scouts confirmed. Movement at the mill, trucks idling in the fog-shrouded yard. Hawke gathered the core riders, Jax, Riley, Timer, under the garage's flickering bulb. "This ends with truth, not blood. For Lila, for the kid who believed." Nods rippled through, bonds tightening like chains on a wheel. The engines would roar again soon, carrying them into the moral fray, where loyalty outshone corruption's dim light. If this story of quiet courage and unbreakable promises has touched you, hit that like button below. It helps spread these tales of redemption to those who need them most. The first blush of dawn crept over the mill district like a hesitant witness, turning the fog-shrouded silos into ghostly sentinels against the pale sky. Hawke's Harley led the way, its engine a subdued rumble that blended with the mist rolling off the nearby river, carrying the damp scent of mud and rusted iron. The Iron Promise rode tight, a phalanx of shadows on two wheels, Jax at the flank, Riley scouting ahead on a lighter scout bike, Old Timer bringing up the rear with his vintage Indian that wheezed like an old man's confession. No chrome flashed ostentatiously this time. Vests were subdued, tools tucked away, cameras concealed in saddlebags. This wasn't a raid, it was an unveiling, the kind that exposed rot without igniting it. Hawke's grip tightened on the handlebars, the leather worn smooth from years of holding fast to oaths that time couldn't erode. The photo of Lila pressed against his ribs, a talisman alongside the map and logbook, their edges frayed from constant reference. Last night's planning in the garage had etched lines deeper into his face. Vargas's name, a spectre from foxholes long buried, where promises to brothers had been sealed in blood and sand. If the mill was the nerve center, a way station for lives rerouted like contraband, then breaching it meant confronting not just Harlan's web, but the fragments of Hawk's own fractured past. Redemption whispered through the wind, fulfill this, mend what war and wanderlust had torn. They crested the final rise, the old mill complex sprawling below like a derelict beast, crumbling brick walls veined with ivy, conveyor belts frozen mid-reach, the river's murmur a constant undercurrent. Trucks idled in the yard, their exhaust curling lazy into the fog, headlights cutting hazy beams that revealed figures moving crates with hurried efficiency. No guards patrolled openly, but shadows shifted at the edges, watchers perhaps, or the desperate funneled through. Hawk signaled a halt in the tree line, the bike's engines cutting to silence, leaving only the drip of condensation from leaves and the distant clank of metal on metal. "Two in, observe," Hawk murmured, his breath fogging in the chill. Jax nodded, slinging a small pack with the clinic nurse's borrowed recorder, a device for capturing truths that words alone couldn't convey. Riley stayed with the bikes, eyes on the access road, while Timer murmured a quiet prayer from his war days, his gnarled hands tracing the club's patch like a rosary. Hawk and Jax slipped forward on foot, boots sinking into the soft earth bordering the yard, the air thickening with the oily tang of machinery and something fouler, fear perhaps, or the residue of confinement. They crouched behind a rusted hopper, close enough to hear voices now, low, accented murmurs in a mix of English and border slang, punctuated by the scrape of boxes. One figure emerged from the main shed, a wiry man in a grease-stained jacket, clipboard in hand, barking orders that echoed off the bricks. Vargas. Hawk recognized the profile instantly, the sharp jaw and calculating eyes unchanged since desert nights where deals were struck under camouflage netting. No uniform, no badge, just the quiet authority of a man who'd built an empire on blurred lines, trading vulnerabilities for crossings that left families hollowed. Jax's camera whirred softly, capturing the scene. Crates stamped with generic labels but heavy with implication. Workers, young, hollow-cheeked, shifting loads under duress, their movements mechanical, eyes downcast. One paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and in that flicker of light, Hawk saw it. A bracelet dangling from a wrist, simple beads matching the one in Lila's photo, the one Tommy had described with trembling voice. Hope surged, bitter and sharp, but Hawk tamped it down. No assumptions, only evidence, the kind that could pierce the veil of official denial. Vargas turned then, his gaze sweeping the yard like a hawk's. Ironic, Hawk thought, the name a cruel echo. He barked something in rapid Spanish, and a door creaked open on the adjacent building, revealing a dimly lit interior, stacked with cots and barred windows, silhouettes stirring within. Heartsick murmurs escaped, pleas in hushed tones, the clink of chains subtle but damning. Jax's lens zoomed, the recorder picking up fragments, names, destinations, a girl's voice cutting through, faint but clear. "Lila, is that you calling?" "No, not her, but another." The web's reach sprawling wider than one loss. Tension coiled as a truck engine coughed to life. Headlights sweeping perilously close. Hawk signaled retreat, but Jax lingered a beat too long, foot slipping on loose gravel. A pebble skittered, loud in the dawn's hush, drawing Vargas's head snap. "Who's there?" The shout carried authority laced with paranoia, figures freezing in the yard. Hawk pulled Jax back into the shadows, hearts pounding against ribs, the fog their fragile ally. They melted into the tree line, breaths held until the mill's activity resumed, uneasy but unbroken. Back with the crew, Jax replayed the footage under the faint glow of a tactical light. The images grainy but irrefutable. The bracelet, the cots, Vargas's face time-stamped against the logbook's entries. "Enough to crack it open," Jax said, voice rough with restrained fury. But Hawk's eyes narrowed on a detail. The workers' faces, some familiar from missing posters Timer had pulled from old contacts. This wasn't just Harlan's operation. It was a syndicate. Tendrils reaching into towns like Tommy's, preying on the overlooked. Exposing it meant risking the Promise's sanctuary. Calls to brass that could turn allies into adversaries. As the sun breached the horizon, gilding the river in molten light, Hawk felt the moral weight settle. Deputy Harlan's warning echoed. The mess of truth versus the tidy lie of silence. But promises weren't selective. They demanded the hard ride, the stand against corruption's slow poison. He radioed the nurse at the clinic. "We've got visuals. Patterns match what you've seen. Marks of rough passage, no consent." Her reply crackled back, steady. "Bring it to me. I'll testify. For the ones we couldn't save." The convoy reformed, engines stirring the mist into eddies. But Hawk held them a moment longer. Staring at the mill's silhouette, he thought of Tommy in his trailer, clutching that envelope like a lifeline. And Lila, wherever the trail led, fighting shadows with a sister's unyielding spirit. This chapter of the promise wasn't closure, it was ignition, loyalty's fire illuminating the path ahead. Vargas would run, Harlan would scheme, but the iron promise rode for the light, unbreakable as the dawn. They throttled forward, the road curving toward town, but a new shadow loomed. A chopper in the sky, distant rotors chopping air, hinting at aerial eyes closing in. The web sensed the probe, coiling tighter. Hawk's resolve hardened, redemption's miles stretched on, each one a vow renewed. The chopper's rotors thrummed like a predator's heartbeat, slicing through the morning sky as Hawk's convoy burst from the tree line onto the cracked blacktop of the old mill road. The mist clung low, veiling their escape in a shroud of white that muffled the engine's growl to a conspiratorial whisper. Hawk leaned into the wind, his Harley's frame vibrating beneath him, the scent of river damp and exhaust sharp in his nostrils. Jax rode tight on his left, the camera pack slung secure across his back, while Riley flanked right, eyes flicking skyward through mirrored shades. Old-Timer brought up the rear, his Indian's faithful chug a steady anchor amid the rising urgency. The aerial shadow circled once, twice, its downdraft rippling the fog like a warning breath. But Hawk didn't flinch. Promises weren't deterred by eyes in the clouds. They pushed hard, tires humming over potholes that jarred bones and stirred dust devils in their wake. The chopper peeled away eastward, toward the border haze. But Hawk knew it wasn't retreat. It was relay, signaling ground forces to close the noose. Vargas's network didn't rely on brute force alone. It thrived on anticipation, on choking off paths before they widened. Hawk's mind raced ahead, piecing the footage's revelations, the bracelet's glint, the barred silhouettes, the workers' haunted glances. Lila could be among them, her spirit unbroken but bent by the machine that had stolen her from a storm-lashed night. Or she could be further along the chain, funneled north to fates Hawk refused to name. Either way, the evidence burned hotter than the sun climbing behind them, a moral torch against the corruption that had let it fester. The road twisted into a narrow canyon, red rock walls rising like silent judges, their shadows cooling the air with the faint mineral tang of ancient stone. Hawk signaled a split, Riley and Timer veering onto a fire trail to draw any pursuit, while he and Jax cut deeper into the ravine, engines echoing off the cliffs in a deceptive chorus. Sweat traced paths down Hawk's back under his vest, the leather sticking like a second skin, but his focus sharpened on the horizon. Redemption's path was never straight. It wound through doubts and detours, demanding loyalty that outlasted fear. He'd made a vow to Tommy in that smoky bar, 3 words that had frozen time, and now it pulled him toward Vargas like gravity reclaiming a fallen star. They emerged onto a forgotten service road, the mill district fading into memory as the landscape opened to scrubland, dotted with yucca and the skeletal remains of abandoned rigs. Jax throttled up beside Hawk, his voice cutting through the wind via helmet comms. That chopper was marking us. Vargas knows we're sniffing close, probably alerting Harlan's deputy kin by now. Hawk nodded, the vibration of the bike syncing with his pulse. The deputy's face from the twilight standoff lingered in his thoughts, that flicker of fractured conscience, a crack in the armor. Not all in badges were lost. Some, like the nurse, clung to the oath's true core: protect the vulnerable, not the veil. Hawk had called her en route, her voice steady over the crackle. Footage matches the patterns. Bring it safe. I'll loop in a contact at the state level, someone clean. As the sun crested fully, bathing the plain in golden fire, a dust plume rose ahead, another vehicle closing fast. Not a cruiser, but a modified jeep, its grille scarred from off-road abuse. 2 figures visible through the windshield. Hawk's gut twisted. These weren't locals, but Vargas's enforcers. Faces hardened by the trade's grim arithmetic. He gunned the engine, Jack's matching stride, the chase igniting like dry tinder. The jeep surged, engine roaring defiance, bullets pinging off rock outcrops as they swerved into firing range. No return fire from the bikes. Hawk's code forbade escalation into chaos. This was about precision, about carving truth from threat. They dodged into a dry wash, the jeep's tires fishtailing in pursuit, the air filling with the acrid bite of scorched rubber and kicked-up alkali. Hawk spotted the overhang, a natural shelf of sandstone, its shadow a brief sanctuary. "Now!" he barked over the comm. Jax peeled left, drawing the jeep's aim, while Hawk looped wide, circling back with the grace of a predator feinting. The enforcers braked hard, doors flying open, rifles raised in the swirling dust. But Hawk was already there, dismounting in a fluid motion, his presence a wall of unyielding calm. "Stand down!" he called, voice carrying like gravel over thunder, hands visible but steady. We saw the mill. The bracelets, the voices. End this quiet or the footage goes wide. Every station, every ear that matters. The lead enforcer, a stocky man with tattoos snaking up his neck like barbed wire, leveled his weapon, eyes narrowing in the glare. "You don't know what you're kicking, biker. Vargas's reach goes deep, deeper than your little club's rides." But hesitation crept in. The second man shifting uneasily, glancing at the horizon where Riley's dust trail signaled reinforcements. Hawk stepped closer, the photo slipping from his pocket into his palm, a visual anchor, Lila's smile a silent indictment. Deep enough to steal sisters from kids who won't quit. We've got names, roots, faces. Deputy Harlan's brother started this. You finish it by walking away. The air hung thick, the jeep's engine ticking hot, coyotes yipping distant mockery. The enforcers exchanged a look, the weight of choices pressing like the sun's unrelenting gaze. Loyalty to Vargas warred with self-preservation, the moral fray Hawk had seen in too many foxholes. Finally, the leader lowered his rifle, spitting into the dust. "This ain't over, but for now, ride your road." They climbed back in, the jeep reversing into the wash, vanishing as abruptly as it had appeared. Hawk exhaled, mounting up as Jax rejoined, the adrenaline fading to a steady burn. They pressed on toward town, the chopper's echo long gone, but the victory felt hollow, partial, like a promise, half kept. Back at the garage, under the hum of fluorescent tubes, the crew reconvened. Riley and Timer rolled in minutes later, unscathed, their diversion drawing off a secondary tale. The nurse arrived discreetly, her scrubs rumpled from a night shift, eyes lighting as Jax cued the footage on a battered laptop. "This is it," she whispered, tracing the bracelet's image. "I've treated girls like this, dehydrated, marked by ropes or worse, but alive, fighting. Lila could be out there, waiting." Hawk nodded, the room's air heavy with oil and resolve, patches on the walls a tapestry of oaths fulfilled. But a new lead emerged from the logbook's margins. A safe house in the hills, coordinates scribbled in haste, dated weeks ago. Vargas's bolt hole, perhaps, or Harlan's last stand. The chopper's flight path matched, heading there. Tension coiled anew. The final push loomed, demanding they ride into the heart of the web, where truths could shatter or bind. For Tommy, it meant answers inching closer. For Hawk, it was the crucible of redemption, loyalty's forge, testing the unbreakable. As dusk painted the garage in amber hues, Hawk stared at the map, fingers tracing the path. The iron promise would move at moonrise, silent as shadows, armed with evidence and unyielding honor. Promises didn't end in chases, they culminated in light piercing the dark. Family chosen standing tall against the storm. The engines would sing again, carrying them toward closure or the fight that defined them. Moonrise cast a silver veil over the hills, turning the scrubland into a labyrinth of elongated shadows that danced with the wind's restless sigh. Hawk's convoy crept forward, engines throttled to a hushed purr that blended with the night's chorus, crickets pulsing like a distant heartbeat, the faint rustle of mesquite branches brushing against fenders. The air hung cool and crisp, laced with the earthy scent of sage and the underlying bite of impending rain, a storm brewing on the horizon like unresolved tension. Jax rode point, his silhouette cutting through the moonlight, while Riley flanked the rear, eyes scanning for the chopper's ghost or ground patrols. Old-timer's Indian wheezed softly beside Hawk, the old man's presence a steadying force, his war-scarred hands gripping the bars like anchors to forgotten oaths. The safe house loomed as a squat adobe structure nestled in a rocky cleft, its walls weathered to the color of bone, a single lantern flickering through cracked shutters like a wary eye. No vehicles marred the dirt yard, but fresh tracks circled the perimeter, tire patterns matching the jeep from the chase, deep ruts suggesting hasty maneuvers. Hawk killed his engine first, the silence amplifying the drip of condensation from overhangs and the distant rumble of thunder. He dismounted, boots sinking into the cool sand, the leather of his vest creaking as he adjusted the concealed camera pack. This was the nexus, the logbook's final whisper, Vargas's retreat, where threads of the network converged. Hawk felt the photo of Lila in his pocket, its edges softened by the journey, a reminder that promises weren't burdens, but beacons, guiding through moral tempests. They fanned out on foot, shadows merging with the night, the hill's slope providing cover as they approached. Jax signaled a halt at the tree line, his gloved hand pointing to movement, a figure pacing the porch, cigarette ember glowing like a fallen star. Vargas. Hawk recognized the gait, the tense shoulders of a man cornered by his own web. No enforcers flanked him. Perhaps the chase had scattered them, or desperation had stripped the operation bare. Inside, muffled voices drifted, low, urgent, laced with accents that spoke of borders crossed under duress. Hawk's pulse steadied. This wasn't invasion, but illumination, truth's quiet siege against lies fortified by years. Hawk stepped into the open, moonlight etching his form in stark relief, the club's patch catching a glint like a badge of honor. "Vargas!" he called, voice carrying clear and even, cutting through the night like a blade through silk. The man froze, the cigarette dropping to spark against the dust before grinding out under his heel. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing in the dim light, recognition dawning like a reluctant dawn. Daniels. Should have known the promise would sniff this out. Old debts die hard, huh? Vargas's tone held no fear, only the weary calculation of a smuggler who'd bartered too many souls. Behind him, the door creaked wider, revealing Harlan, gaunt, unshaven, clutching a ledger like a shield, his face a map of frayed nerves. Hawk halted yards away, hands open at his sides, the crew emerging from shadows to form a silent arc, Jax with the camera rolling discreetly, Riley and Timer poised like sentinels. The air thickened with the scent of tobacco and sweat, thunder growling closer. "Deaths! This is about lives, Vargas. Girls like Lila, stolen from storms and small towns, funneled through your mills and roots." We saw the bracelets, heard the voices. No more hiding. He pulled the photo free, holding it toward the light, Lila's smile a poignant counter to the men's hardened stares. Harlan flinched, his eyes darting away, the weight of his diner facade crumbling under the exposure. Vargas laughed, a hollow bark that echoed off the rocks. Lila, that runaway, she came willing, dreams of the city, money for her kid brother. Harlan here just helped. But the lie cracked, his gaze flickering to the safe house interior, where shadows shifted, figures huddled on cots, eyes wide in the lantern's glow. One stepped forward, a young woman with tangled hair and a familiar bracelet, her voice trembling but defiant. "Lila's not here, but she was. Passed through last month, fighting all the way, said she'd make it back for her brother." Vargas lied. We all did. For survival. The words hung, a confession uncoiling, the network's captives turning witnesses in the moonlight's unforgiving gaze. Harlan slumped against the wall, the ledger slipping from his grasp to thud in the dirt, pages fluttering like surrendered flags. It started small, extra shifts, promises of help, then the storm. I panicked, called in favors. Vargas took her north, but she escaped, they say. A trucker spotted her in a border town, heading home. Tears traced his cheeks, the corruption's shell fracturing under loyalty's assault. Not Hawk's force, but the unyielding truth of a boy's plea and a club's vow. Vargas's shoulders sagged, the fight draining like sand through fingers. "Take the ledger, end it clean. I've got a family too, chosen, like yours." He tossed a keyring toward Hawk, unlocking the safehouse door, revealing documents, maps, a hidden cache of evidence that mapped the web's full span. Jax captured it all. The turnover, the captives' relieved murmurs, the first raindrops pattering like absolution. No shots fired, no chains broken by force. Justice emerged from dialogue's edge, moral integrity outshining the storm's flash. Hawk nodded to the young woman, handing her the photo. "Tell Tommy she's coming home. The promise rides for her now." As thunder rolled, the crew escorted the witnesses down the hill, engines stirring to life in a symphony of renewal. Vargas and Harlan stood alone, the law's distant sirens heralding their reckoning, not vengeance but accountability's dawn. Back in town, under the garage's warm lights, Tommy waited, his small frame silhouetted by the door, eyes lighting as Hawk approached with the ledger and tales of escape. "She's alive," Hawk said, clapping the boy's shoulder, the 3 words from the bar echoing in completion. Dawn broke clear, washing the hills in gold as a call came. Lila, safe in a shelter miles north, her voice crackling over the line. Promising reunion. For Hawk, the ride closed a circle. War's ghosts laid to rest, redemption forged in asphalt and honor. The iron promise gathered, engines idling, ready for the next vow. Family chosen, unbreakable, their roar a legacy against the cynical world. Rain-slicked roads gleamed under the rising sun as the convoy escorted Lila home, her figure on a borrowed bike between Hawk and Tommy, wind whipping her hair like freedom reclaimed. Promises fulfilled, scars mended in silence. The true ride never ended, but honor's path stretched eternal. Thank you for riding this journey of loyalty and quiet courage with us. If these stories of redemption resonate, subscribe for more tales that honor the unbreakable bonds of chosen family. We'll see you on the next road.